The giant, Bruin, grabbed Charlie by his right forearm, lifting him up into the air, with only his left toes still touching the ground. The 877-pound grizzly squeezed its jaws tight as Charlie could hear his forearm crack with the warm saliva from the bear's mouth drooling down his arm. Charlie was pale in the face, petrified by the terror this giant bear distilled within him. The bear dropped him to the ground, ready to gut him like a fish, only to hear some scuffling to its right, about 30 feet away. And that's when both the bear and James Wright had an equal moment of shock and surprise. What's up, guys? Iceman here. So this story is called The One That Came Barreling Out of the Woodwork, and I'm excited for you guys to join with me on this adventure, as this story is already seeming to be quite alluring. But nonetheless, I appreciate you guys for coming by. If you will, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit the bell so you're notified next time I post a video. Become a patron or a channel member if you want, links in the description below. And I understand that my voice sounds a little different this video. I lost my voice over the past couple of days. For whatever reason, the creator decided to take it away from me. But I think it's slowly coming back, so if you're willing to bear with me for a little longer, then we will have ourselves a bear of a time. So before I bore you with these bearing details, let's get into the story. Charlie came into James's life just at the right time. James moved back from Southern California. He grew tired of living like a cockroach with the ever-continual growth and cost of living. He wanted the opportunity once again to be able to go outside, enjoy the wilderness. He just wanted to get away. So that's when he decided to move back to Saginaw, Michigan, where this story begins. James had started to become self-sufficient in life. He wasn't making much money, but he got to the point where he no longer needed a job. He had a few side hustles and was able to get what he wanted in life for the time being: a roof over his head with no roommates and women. He was searching for something different when it came to friends. He didn't need someone to encourage him or to pick him up. He didn't need someone to boost his confidence while out in public. He simply wanted someone to entertain him, and that's where Charlie comes into play. Just barely 21 years old, with his whole life ahead of him, James and Charlie shot things off right away. Charlie was a man of shorter stature, pale, pasty skin, with a taste for alcohol. James was about 6'3", athletic, relatively muscular, enjoyed working out, and trying for the most part to stay healthy. James was intrigued by Charlie Harrison's mindset. He seemed to be the type to take the road less traveled, just as James himself would. Charlie had a different perspective on the world. He was quite blunt and nihilistic, but still with a bit of a charm to him. These are the traits that James found intriguing. It wasn't until years later that they decided to venture out to Yellowstone. The two were married, established themselves to some extent, but still, life had its general concerns. James was now 35 years old, still in good physical shape. Charlie was 31, gained a few more pounds, but still up for adventure. We should go camping sometime, just you and I. Maybe go to Yellowstone, get away for a little while, see nature, gain some perspective. Charlie Harrison said to James, "You mean you want me to go out there with you and defecate in the middle of the woods? No bidet? How the hell do you expect me to do something like that?" James sarcastically remarked. They both had a good laugh, and shortly after, Charlie responded, "Come on, man. It'll be good for you. Try something new. Step out of your comfort zone. Maybe it'll help you with your perspective when you get back. You'll stop worrying about dumb things all the time." Charlie playfully responded. And so it was that they decided to set out on their great adventure. They chose a place called 7 Mile Hole Campground in Yellowstone National Park. It had a volcanic turf to it, quite hilly, a large body of water, a river nearby, and quite secluded. They thought they'd go out there, spend a few nights, go on a few hikes, drink some coffee, and call it a trip. But boy, were they in for a surprise. The trip there was long and tedious, a 21-hour drive, and James hated traveling. But nonetheless, they persevered. When they finally arrived, they went to one of the park headquarters and took a nice visit through the shops. Charlie had his trusty Ruger Redhawk, inspired by popular Clint Eastwood films. Charlie always had a sort of ego about him, embodying archetypes that he idolized, even at the cost of practicality. He smoked cigars, drank too much, and rarely exercised, embodying TV heroes in those ways, but unfortunately, not in the unseen ways, where the alcohol they drink on screen is, in actuality, food-colored water or even juice, and the cigars they smoke on screen are, for the most part, the only cigars they ever smoke. Off-screen, they are fit and active, put in the hard work in the gym, similarly to James's lifestyle, ironically. James was equipped with his Glock 17 and a nice, bench-made pocket knife with a 3.5-inch blade that he spent way too much money on. The Glock, while insufficient against grizzlies, is better than nothing, as James would say. He did, after all, have it chambered in full metal jackets, giving the pistol a sliver of hope in penetrating a grizzly's 3 to 4-inch skull. Of course, they thought it would be unlikely if they would even see a bear, and even more so, be attacked by one. They carried these guns, but they both knew the rules. Hunting and discharge of firearms remained prohibited in Yellowstone. They had them there for safety measure and would worry about the law later. Granted, they'd be put in the situation where they have to break it. After a 5-mile hike through the woods and trails, they found the camp, and the first night was pleasant. They both awakened to the sound of birds and the smell of pine. James decided to collect some budding pine cones, filled his backpack with them, claiming they would help his sexual arousability via a remedy he planned to make with them once he arrived back home. Charlie scoffed at the idea. He wasn't the type to think nature had much to offer in terms of health benefits. He was more of the type to think that the entities that rule the world have one's best interest in mind, that the most powerful, rich entities in existence just want us to get along and be healthy, and that all this nature to health stuff was a bunch of mumbo-jumbo. But still, their friendship persevered. It was the second night where things took a turn for the worst. Charlie was guzzling alcohol like a fish most of the evening, barely fazed by the visual effects as usual. He had a high tolerance, and it was shocking to witness how much it took for him to get buzzed. He did suffer one notable side effect throughout the night, however. He had to piss constantly. They roasted s'mores on the campfire, enjoying the sweets. James only had one single beer. Charlie was on his 9th over a 3-hour duration. The two decided to call it a night at about 10:30 p.m. and entered their tents, leaving the fire smoldering, forgetting to get rid of the charred graham crackers left over from their snacks. This would end up being their greatest regret. It was 2 a.m. Charlie had to relieve himself. He unzipped his tent and felt the cool air at his face, the campground only lit by a dim moonlight. He stood aside a tree and urinated like a racehorse, the stream thick and full, his body desperately excreting the alcohol he drank that night, a great relief. He couldn't help but hear some mudging around near where the campfire lay, the ashes barely lit by a faint ember. Something was digging through it, something large and husky. It stood on all fours, only about 15 feet away from where Charlie's stand. He squinted to make out what it was while reaching for his holster, only to quickly realize that he left his Redhawk in the tent. He froze. The giant Bruin turned and looked at him, its eyes glowing in the moonlight. Charlie could see the breath steaming from its mouth, the long, spaced-out, breaths, the huffing, the bear took a bluff step toward Charlie, which noticeably startled him. But he stood his ground in utter shock. Charlie has never seen an animal this big, so close before. The wind was right where he could smell it, similar to a wet dog, with a musky yet foul aroma about it, almost like a dead animal. He noticed its ears go back and its head lower. He was no expert on animal behavior, but he knew this was a threatening gesture. Charlie turned and ran toward his tent. A moment later, he found himself on the ground, face down, with the bear's front paws holding him down. It happened so fast, I thought I tripped and hit my head. Just finding myself on the ground like that, Charlie couldn't breathe well, and instantly, the bear started digging into his back, through a thin bathrobe and flannel shirt. I could hear its claws scraping against what I believe was my spine. I felt nothing for the moment, but then searing pain. Charlie screamed, a piercing scream that could be heard for miles. He did what no man being attacked by a bear should do. He gave up his frontal to it, spinning around, trying to protect himself with his hands and arms. James, awoken instantly from the sounds of terror, shook out of his sleeping bag and dashed to the front of his tent. He couldn't find his flashlight as he fell asleep with his fingers clenching it tightly, only for it to get lost in this sudden debacle. Glock in his pocket, he stepped out of his tent to see the silhouette 10 yards away of a hulking, musty beast, with what seemed to be Charlie under it. James and the bear glared at one another, and for a moment in time, things froze. Charlie struggled to get from under it, and instantly the bear turned back to him, digging through his midsection, as if it were made of dirt. His flannel ripped open, the cloth mixing with blood and bodily filth. Its claws made it to his groin region, severing his left testicle nearly from his body, dragging along flesh and blood and veins with it. Something from a horror film. The bear ripped through his jeans as if they were made of paper. Charlie covered his crotch area with his hands, screaming in hopelessness. The bear swatted his hands out of the way and clawed at his groin even more, causing more severe damage, and then grabbed him by his right forearm and lifted him off the ground. I thought it was a nightmare, James says later. All of a sudden, life felt so fragile and horrifying. I don't even remember thinking. It was like an out-of-body experience. I don't remember premeditating anything, but I charged the bear. I jumped on its back and tried to gouge its eyes with my fingers. The bear turned and gripped onto James's left hand, hurling James off his back. He tossed me 10 feet, like a wrestler, James said. The bear continued gorging Charlie's useless body. It's crazy how I didn't feel anything, even though I later found my hand was broken in several places, James said. But I charged the bear again, this time with my knife. I stabbed it in the side about 3 times before it stood up on all fours and knocked me to the ground. It must have been 10 feet tall. It was huge. The bear then turned to James, towering over him. A loud, guttural roar sent a shockwave through their spines. The bear trotted toward James, seemingly tired, but still attacked. I was on my butt, and the bear clawing and biting at me. I tried to fend it off with my knife, getting a few neck stabs in, but it only seemed to piss it off. I remember it clenching to me and holding me to the ground. I couldn't even use my arm anymore. It felt like hundreds of pounds just holding me down, suffocating me. Charlie, while holding his left testicle in place, managed to stand up despite several bodily wounds, including a shredded thigh muscle. James on the ground with the bear in a muddy scuffle. Charlie reached for anything he could find. Nothing. He limped toward the fire pit, and picked up a 4-foot-long, 1-inch thick stick they used as a skewer. Still smoldering at its tip, he jolted at the bear and stabbed it in its necular region. The stick was just right for it. I remember we even sharpened it the night before with James's knife. It was like a small spear, and I thrusted it so hard that it stuck into the bear's neck. The bear gave out a ferocious bellow and lifted its head off from James, releasing its jaws from his shoulder. The bear lunged at Charlie, taking him to the ground, relentlessly clawing and biting at his upper body. James stood up and, realizing he had his Glock, chambered around in it and filled the bear with lead. I shot it maybe 7 to 8 times. Charlie was flattened under it, so I knew I could hit the bear without harming Charlie, or at least I was quite sure. But I knew that this was our last chance at survival. We were both heavily wounded. I thought Charlie was dead when I was shooting the bear. He wasn't moving. The bear dropped, what seemed like smoke coming from its wounds. Then I shot it 6 more times, James said. I heaved its giant carcass off Charlie, and somehow we made it. Shockingly, he was still alive, and even more impressive was that he was able to talk to me, and he was still holding his growing area. Fortunately, we had cell phone reception in our camp, and we managed to get airlifted to the nearest hospital. It only took him about 30 minutes to get to us, but it seemed like a long 30 minutes. For the most part, Charlie Harrison and James Wright's wounds have healed, be it some scarring. Charlie lost his left testicle from this incident and is still to this day trying to produce a child. After seeing such a horrific incident, James is uncertain if he wants to even bring another life into this world. So what do you guys think about that story? It seems like those guys were pretty damn brave, but I don't know why James didn't use his Glock to begin with. It very well could have been the case that in such an alarming situation, you forget about your surroundings and even your options. They say that these sort of incidents happen in the blink of an eye. So it makes me want to always have my hand ready to go on bear spray next time I venture out into bear country. But I'm curious what you guys have to say about this story. What would you do in such a situation? And the reality is, I appreciate bears, and I have nothing against them. I think they are fascinating creatures, and the Creator has them here with us in this time for good reason. But they must be respected, and caution should be used while in bear country. But I appreciate you guys for listening. Like this video if you will, and stay tuned for more chilling tales from the Iceman.